Okay, and you can see chapter 13 just fine. Okay, so chapter 13. So those of you who are in Security Plus are already well familiar with a lot of these things that we're going to be going over today. For those of you who are going to be taking Security Plus, don't freak out. We've got an entire chapter that's trying to cover all things security, which there's no way that one chapter can cover everything. So we're just going to be going over some of the basic things that you need to know for your A+ certification. Also, have any of you guys looked up the practice tests? Okay.
No, not yet.
Okay. So we're going to go over security threats, different types of malware, how to protect against network attacks and social engineering attacks. We'll talk about data, how important it is to protect data, and how important it is to destroy data properly. We also need to talk about a security policy. Every place should have a security policy implemented. We're going to talk about securing our end devices, how to secure our workstation, some best practices. We'll talk about the Windows Local Security Policy tool, which is SecPol, which is a very cool tool. If you are managing a small business that isn't a domain, isn't an Active Directory integrated domain environment, then you would use the local security policy tool to set your local policy, and then you could import and export that policy to all of your devices so that you've got a uniform approach to security. We'll also talk about the Windows firewall tool. We'll talk about configuring your browser for secure access. Naturally, the browser they're discussing is going to be Edge or Internet Explorer, and some security maintenance in Windows. Then we're going to talk about wireless security and wireless communication. And I always chuckle when I have to say wireless security, because there is no such thing, in my humble opinion. So we'll talk about troubleshooting processes for security and some of the steps that we can figure out how to manage our security. So some of our threats. There's lots of different types of threats that are created, and malware is usually installed on a computer without the user knowing. Once there's malware inside of your system, then there's lots of things that could be changed. Your computer configuration, you could delete files, or in the case of ransomware, you could encrypt the files. You could Hey, Tim, do you want to mute your video? Yeah, just mute your video. Thanks, please. You can also, so there's lots of things that malware can do to disrupt your environment. So most viruses really need some sort of human intervention to get the virus started and running on a specific computer. Some viruses will run behind the scenes, like spyware. Other viruses are designed to attack your system, like delete files, create problems for the operating system. And that's why running antivirus software is best practice and is the absolute least thing that you can possibly do to protect your system. Just running antivirus software is not enough to protect you from all the things, but it is at least the start of protection. So there's thousands of new viruses created every week. So you have to make sure that you have the latest of DAT files, so definition files. You have to make sure that you have the latest signatures for your antivirus software to make sure that your system remains safe. A virus is going to embed itself as part of a virus that embeds itself as part of an executable is a program virus. It just piggybacks itself onto the executable. So when the executables run, the viruses also run. Another type of virus that it can exist is a boot sector virus. So you don't have to manually run an executable. All you have to do is start your operating system, and then that virus will also execute, which is a good reason why you should, in your BIOS, check the box for secure boot options, and also uh, for the no execute bit. There's other viruses that take advantage of scripting, like JavaScript, and can infect your system by coming in through your browser. And macros in a third-party application, like in Microsoft Office, can be used as viruses as well, and can delete data or send your files to a third party. So there's so much going on, and so much to try and protect yourself from. So one of the ways that malware and ransomware can get into your system is by tricking you to run that software yourself. And that's called a Trojan horse. So the name comes from the Greeks, who, of course, during the Trojan War, they created a large wooden horse, and they hid all of their combatants inside of it. And then they pushed the Trojan horse into the city of Troy. And just as the wooden horse was pretending to be a gift to the Trojans, the Trojan horse software is software that pretends to be something else as well. So anytime that you find software, consider the source of where you're getting that software, especially if you're looking for free software. Unless you're looking at the code that created that software, you really don't know what that is actually doing to your system in the background. So it's a really good idea to make sure that all of your software is also digitally signed. Anyway, it could be, a game that you want to install, or some sort of, application. Once you install that software, you may or may not see the application that you were expecting to see. It might be, that you are seeing that application, but you were not expecting to be infected by malware. And it can easily circumvent your existing security, because you, the end user, are the one running the software on your computer. You installed it. So once the malware begins to run, if it's recognized by your anti-malware software program, then you can stop it before it gets into your system. But some Trojan horses will disable your antivirus and your anti-malware before they install. And that ensures that they're going to embed themselves into your system. Once that's installed, it may download other types of malware. It may bot your system so that you end up being a zombie bot for a future DDoS attack. It's just, it could download other types of malware that would allow the bad guys access to your system from the outside. So lots to think about here. Always consider the source when it comes to your software that you get for free, and just download from wherever. There's lots of different types of malware. Ransomware is called crypto malware, and that's a type of malware that encrypts all of your files on your system. The only way that you can receive the decryption key is to provide some type of payment to the attackers, usually in the form of Bitcoin. And this is obviously a much more significant problem, because you can't simply remove the virus or malware and then gain access to your files. All of your files and documents and pictures and movies and data have been encrypted. If you don't have the key, you can't decrypt it. The operating system, of course, is still running, which allows you to see these messages that appear on your screen that tells you to pay them. But all of your personal data has now been encrypted by the bad guys. And the encryption methods that they use are incredibly powerful. You're not able to brute force or guess what the decryption key might be. The only way to receive the decryption key is to send the bad guys some money and hope that they send you back the decryption key. There's some instances where the ransomware, there is no, they won't send you the decryption key. They don't care. As soon as they get your money, they're done with you. Yeah, it's a big problem. Just ask Enlo. So one of the best ways to avoid any of this from occurring is to not only run really good anti-malware software, but also to make sure that you always have an offline copy of your backup available. That way, if someone does encrypt all of your files and all of your data, you can simply copy over your save files from your backup. And then you can continue operating normally without having to pay the bad guy any additional ransom. Because the more we keep paying them, the more they keep doing this. And now there is ransomware as a service on the dark web. So it's ugly. There's also rootkits. So rootkits come from the term root in the Unix operating system, and that's where the root user is a super user or the administrator of all the things. Root is the highest level of administrator you can be on a Linux or Unix system. Rootkits are definitely different than other types of malware because they're modifying the kernel of the operating system itself, not just running as an application in the operating system. So it effectively is part of the operating system, which makes it extremely dangerous, and because it has complete control of the operating system. It also means that the rootkit becomes invisible to virus and anti-malware software. So it becomes incredibly difficult to identify that a rootkit is even running. Fortunately, rootkits are relatively rare, but they do happen. And one of the things that I found is normally a rootkit is going to create a backdoor on your system. And there really is no way to know if you've deleted all of the parts of a rootkit because they can be so embedded. So my best practice if a system has been rooted is to get the data off of there and do a reinstall. Just give it a clean operating system because there's no way that you can tell whether or not that backdoor or that remote access is still hiding there somewhere. Some malware is simply put into your system to watch what you're doing, right? It's spyware. Spyware may be trying to present you with advertising in the case of adware, or it may be waiting for you to log into your bank or present a credit card number and capture that information as well. There's lots of, because of during tax season and because of the COVID stimulus checks that people are getting, there's lots of scams out there to try and get a hold of that money. It's not uncommon to use a Trojan horse method to be able to embed this spyware on a system. So you may be installing peer-to-peer software, you may be installing security software that appears to be real, but in fact it's fake security software, and that ultimately installs the malware onto your computer. So as much as I like the idea of us sharing things, when you're getting stuff from disreputable sources, you got to consider the source always. Make sure that whatever you're getting from any disreputable sources are being run in a sandbox on your system, you know, in a VM or something like that. Anyway, spyware is designed to watch your browsing habits. So it may even, you know, in some cases, it'll capture your keystrokes, so it'll install a keylogger. And then when you put in your username and your password, then that information is being sent to a third party. Keyloggers can be a significant security concern. We type so much information into our keyboards, right? And then capturing that information can provide a third party with personal details, bank information, or credit card information. This would also provide details about what websites you visit and information that you put into emails and so much more. So these keyloggers capture everything that you've typed into the keyboard. So the attackers would be able to go through an entire day's worth of information to see not only what you may have typed into a website, but what emails you may have sent as well. Of course, any communication that you make when you're purchasing things online or visiting a bank account is all done with encrypted protocols over the network. But keyloggers are grabbing this information long before that encryption is getting implemented. So a keylogger is able to see all of that information before it's sent over the network. There's also specialized keyloggers that capture more than just what you're typing on the keyboard. They could be everything that you send to the clipboard. They could be activating your webcam. They could be activating your microphone. They could be taking screenshots of your system every minute. So it might also be, you know, getting your instant messaging or your search engine queries. Lots of details that those keyloggers can provide, and they can use that information against you. Then we have worms. Worms are able to replicate themselves between systems to systems without needing any human to interact with those computers. And this can be a significant problem because worms are able to use our high-speed networks to propagate really quickly between systems. And they're so fast and so prevalent that you could plug in an unpatched system that's accessible from the internet, and that system would be infected in a matter of minutes. So an example of a worm that installs ransomware on the system is WannaCry. WannaCry started on a system that was already infected, and then that system begins looking across the internet to see what other devices are available. And if it finds a system that's susceptible to a particular vulnerability, it can be exploited. WannaCry used this type of exploit called Eternal Blue, which was one of the many NSA tools that was put out by gosh, I'm having a brain fart. NSA tool, and it was put out by, I forget their name, but it was a Taos, it was a tool that the NSA created for offensive security. Anyway, so when you use once Eternal Blue is installed onto the systems, it downloads the malware and then it installs WannaCry onto that operating system, if that's what it's set up to do. So anti-malware programs. I love the fact that we're seeing a Windows, it looks like a Windows XP security alert, which is kind of amusing. But anyway, if you want to stop malicious code from running on your computer, you need antivirus software and anti-malware software. You sometimes see these as two separate applications, but increasingly we're seeing them shipped as a single integrated application. It's designed to identify any malicious software that may be executing in the memory of your computer. If this antivirus or anti-malware software identifies this malicious software, then in real time it will block that software from running on your system. Viruses and malware has gotten really, really advanced. You know, back in the day, there was antivirus software. I mean, there were viruses that were written to hide inside of Norton Antivirus. And Norton Antivirus didn't look at itself when it was scanning a system. It was looking at the system. So those things haven't changed. And the intelligence with which our new malware is being created is just, there's no such thing as security, plain and simple. Security is just a matter of whack-a-mole. So you destroy one vulnerability and there's another one right behind it. There's also options to run, and a lot of times your malware is going to disable your antivirus. So there's options to run on-demand scans of your system. So at any time you can have an antivirus or anti-malware signature check every single file that's stored on your computer. The latest generation of antivirus and anti-malware system is designed to look for malicious activity executing on your system, and that means that the software doesn't need to be an exact signature of the specific virus, but instead it's looking heuristically for overall malicious activity on your system. If the system is infected with malware, then you may find the case that it's not able to boot. And in those particular cases, you're going to need some way to get into the operating system and repair the damage. One of the ways to do this is by using the Windows recovery environment, or you can also use a Linux distro to live boot from either a DVD or from a USB drive. And then you can at least get the data off of there, because that is your main concern, is getting the data off of there, having it backed up, and then you can manage the virus or the malware. So good anti-malware programs can detect and block Trojans, rootkits, ransomware, spyware, keyloggers, and adware programs. Anti-malware programs continuously look for known patterns against a database of malware signatures. They can also use, as I said, heuristic malware identification that detects specific behavior associated with some types of malware. So new malware is always being developed. Therefore, anti-malware software has to be updated regularly. This process should be enabled by default. Always download the signature files from the manufacturer's website to make sure that the update is authentic and not corrupted by malware. To avoid creating too much traffic in a single website, some manufacturers will distribute their signature files for download to multiple download sites, and those are called mirror sites. And if you've ever downloaded a Linux distro, quite frequently you're using the mirror sites that are available for that. So something to be cautious about is when downloading the signature files from a mirror, ensure that the mirror site is a legitimate site. So always link to the mirror site from the manufacturer's website, not from somewhere else. And there's a great video on anti-malware programs. Please watch it. So remediating infected systems. So absolutely, positively, if you think that a system has a virus, the first thing that you should ever do is disconnect it from the network. Disconnect it from the network, absolutely, positively. When a malware protection program detects that a computer has been infected, it'll remove or quarantine the threat, but the computer is most likely still at risk. So many anti-malware programs can be set to run on a system start before loading Windows. Removing malware may require that the computer be rebooted into safe mode. You may need to find the exact registry entries that it has created, because don't forget, everything that you do in a system is going to be logged in the registry. You may have to, do a lot of homework and contact a specialist to ensure that your system has been cleaned completely. I would always, if I'm remediating an infected system, I will always run multiple brands of antivirus software multiple times and reboot and run it again and reboot and run a different one, and then check the registry. And it's really important to make sure that you do your due diligence, because infected systems are just a problem. If it gets really bad and really hairy and you're not too sure, as long as you've got the data off of there, it's safe to just reformat the system and and install a fresh operating system. Now, viruses and malware has gotten really advanced. I'm sure that you guys have heard about some of the malware that can attack your CPU. There's other malware that we found that will hide in the buffer of your hard drive. So it's very sophisticated. I would strongly suggest that if you find something that's terribly infected, get the data off of there and then recover, give it a clean installation and then recover the data from your backups. The operating system, sometimes, we have restore points, right, that we set up on our system, and that the system will automatically do every 24 hours. It'll create a new restore point. Malware has been known to hide in restore points as well. So you need to make sure that you purge any of your restore points after you've cleaned the malware. Make sure that all those the restore points have been cleaned. Another explanation, a video on remediating an infected system. And network attacks. So networks are targets for sure. On average, an attacker is in your system 200 days at least before anybody even notices. They do reconnaissance and then they do their homework. They're looking for network information about a target using Google search, whois, and other tools. A lot of times when you are applying for a job in a tech or in an industry, they will use a headhunter or a a place like Rush Personnel, one of those kind of places, to so that they are looking for, okay, so they're trying to have people apply for a job, but they don't want to post the requirements that they're looking for because they don't want everybody to know that this business is using this software and this operating system and these protocols and this network hardware. But they need employees that have those skills. So that's why they'll use a third party like Rush Personnel to find employees, because you don't want to advertise what you've got in your network. That makes it real easy, right? Other things that you want to think about is how much information your business is putting out on their website. You know, does it have a list of all the people there? Does it have their email addresses, all the staff, their email addresses? Perfect information for using, perfect information for spear phishing. Users are going to be one of your biggest one of your biggest problems. Anyway, so first they're going to do their homework. Sorry, I went out into left field. I'm back again. First, they're going to do some research about the business, about the network. Then they're going to do a ping sweep to find out the target's public network address and determine which IP addresses are active. And then once they do that, they'll determine which services and operating systems are available on active ports using Nmap or SuperScan or other tools. And then they're going to run a vulnerability scan to discover what types of applications and operating systems are in that network, what things have unpatched updates and have vulnerabilities that have already been published. Makes it real easy. There's lots of tools that they can use to do that, like Nipper or Sakuna PSI, and lots of other tools. And then so once they've determined what operating systems you have and how much they're patched and what's vulnerable, then they can discover vulnerable services to exploit using Metasploit, Core Impact, or a lot of other tools. So there's so many tools out there that make it really easy to be a bad guy. We've got different types of TCP/IP attacks. We've got, of course, your regular denial of service attack, and that's when an attacker completely overwhelms a target device with false requests to create a denial of service for legitimate users. And that would be one person hitting something with constant pings, for example. Then we've got distributed DOS, or distributed denial of service, and that's when we have a whole army of bots that are going to amplify that DDoS attack using lots of infected hosts called zombies. And then that's going to overwhelm a target. Dyn DNS was one of the largest, most potent DDoS attacks ever. And basically, what the bad guys exploited was a vulnerability in cameras and webcams and in CCTV cameras. And it used that vulnerability to ping Dyn DNS, which, took it down completely. The amount of bandwidth that was utilized was, I think, one of the highest percentages of bandwidth ever used in a DDoS attack. Excuse me. Then we have DNS poisoning. So we all rely on DNS, and we know that that's a hierarchical server. Well, if the top level DNS registrars get exploited, then that gets pushed all the way down the line. So DNS poisoning is an attack where the attacker successfully infects a host to accept false DNS records, pointing to malicious servers, and then that can be replicated depending upon where in the DNS hierarchy it's initiated. And that's why it's really important to set up scavenging for your DNS records, which we'll learn in the security class, in the server class. Man in the middle, of course, is an attack where an attacker intercepts communication between two hosts, and you don't even know that that person is there. We also have replay attacks, and that's a type of spoofing attack where the attacker captures an authenticated packet, alters it, and then sends it to the original destination. Spoofing is an attack where the attacker forges an IP address to gain access to the resource. And then a SYN flood attack, where the attacker exploits the TCP three-way handshake and leaves it hanging there. And we'll discuss, we'll get into more of that when we talk, when we get into the network classes, because that's when we really talk about SYN flood and the TCP handshake and how important that is in transmission control protocol. We've got zero-day attacks. And there's two terms that are commonly used to describe when a threat's detected. There's 0 day, which is referred to as a 0-day threat or a 0-day exploit. And this is the day that an unknown vulnerability becomes discovered by the vendor. The term is referenced to the amount of time that the vendor has to address the vulnerability, basically. And then we have 0 hour, and that's the moment when the exploit is discovered. The software can be exploited until a patch that addresses the vulnerability is made, which is why it is so important and crucial that you update your operating systems, and that you update your applications as well, because it's super important. Then we've got so there's no single solution to protect against all TCP or 0-day attacks. One solution is to use defense in depth approach, and that's known as a layered approach. Okay, so there's a difference between defense in depth and a layered approach, even though defense in depth is a layered approach in security. So the course uses those terms synonymously, but defense in depth refers to an even more comprehensive security strategy approach. The three elements of layered security. It's going to require a combination of networking devices and services working together in tandem. All of your network devices, including the router and switches, have to be secure to prevent attackers from tampering with devices. So like the first thing that you need is a security policy. So, and that includes an acceptable use policy for your employees. It also includes some solutions and security rules, what they are and are not allowed to do. For example, when it's against the law for you to, exploit the View College network. So you need a security policy. Your users' security information is super important. You need to make sure that you educate your users because they are going to be your weakest link. Web security, filtering and prevention. You need to make sure that if you have applications and you're a software developer, you need to make sure that those applications are developed with security in mind. And that includes having input validation and having error messages, exception handling managed properly. Make sure that you're patching your system and your software, so your entire network, everything needs to be covered. Endpoint encryption, your email security, you're going to make sure that whatever email security you're using is going to have a blacklist for all of the bad spam filters, right? You're going to have firewalls for your gateway, your edge device, and also for your host device. And of course, anti-malware, antivirus, and next-gen solutions, for example, unified threat management, disaster recovery, and business continuity plans. So what happens? It's not a case of if, it's a case of when. What do you do when it hits the fan? How do you recover from that? What are the most critical things that you need to put into place in order to get the business back up and running again? And one of the things that you definitely need to do, and backup, off-site and on-site. Make sure that you got backups. Make sure that you identify the critical data and that it isn't accessible to everyone. Make sure that you're following best practices as far as least privilege. So you only want to give a user enough privilege to actually do the thing that they're supposed to do, and no more than that. You should not have an entire group of network admins running around, nor should you have all of your network admins using administrator and a password as one account, because you want to make sure that you divide that up. One of the problems with having the administrator and the user on the same account would be simply your log files are only going to show that it was an administrator. It isn't going to show which administrator did what when. Social engineering, as I said, this is your people, your users, they are your weakest link. And so it is so important that you make sure that you educate your users. So one of the things that we want to think about is, excuse me, if you're going to open the door for me, then why should I pick the lock? Why should I worry about hacking if you're just going to give me your username and password? I'm in. So a lot of cyber criminals are going to be using social engineering techniques to deceive unsuspecting targets into revealing confidential information, because that's the easiest way. Social engineering is an access attack. It attempts to manipulate individuals into performing actions or divulging confidential information. Social engineers often rely on human nature and people's willingness to help. Social engineering is often used in conjunction with other network attacks. Other things you want to think about is, what are you putting on social media? So people who friend you on social media, they can get lots of information about you through your social media account, which in turn can be used for them to social engineer you. Oh, I see you like, Pekingese dogs. I have 3 Pekingese dogs. Look at the pictures of them, and oh, we should, just trying to find some sort of, develop some sort of friendship between the victim is one of the best ways of social engineering. Other things that we're really susceptible to is being misunderstood. So for example, somebody who has a heavy accent, we'll ask them, could you repeat that? Could you repeat that? Well, by the 3rd time, we're not asking them again. And so we'll just do what they want. Could you do me a favor? Could you hold the door for me? Because my arms are full of things. What if there's somebody in a wheelchair or on crutches? Maybe they're going to want the door held for them. Well, are they supposed to have access to the building? Are they supposed to have access to that room? So lots of things to think about. Social engineering, there's lots of different things to think about when it comes to social engineering. And it's a part of so much. So some of the different techniques, we've got pretexting and attackers pretending to need personal data in order to confirm your identity or the identity of the victim. Phishing, so an attacker is going to send fraudulent emails disguised as being from a trusted source. And that we're pretty good at figuring out. For example, very few of us are going to fall for the Nigerian prince scam anymore, right? But spear phishing, an attacker could create a targeted phishing attack for a specific individual or organization. They could say, oh, I know, so-and-so who is the CEO of the company, and he told me to ask you for this information. So we need to teach our users. Spam, unsolicited email, which, you know, has harmful links, malware, or deceptive content. Something for something. So when an attacker requests personal information in exchange for something else, which is another reason why a lot of companies, especially IT, will check your credit report and your credit history. Because if you owe somebody a whole bunch of money, you know, maybe you might be more susceptible to selling secrets. Which of course is really difficult these days since everybody's lost their jobs, and, you know, and we've got this big, huge crisis right now. It's certainly understandable right now. I think most companies are not going to give anybody dings on their credit report for this coronavirus outbreak problem that we have. What else do we have? Baiting. So leaving a flash drive in a parking lot, right? I mean, that's perfect. Oh my God, that's a 128 gig flash drive. Cool, I'll pick that up. I'll plug it into the network at work and boom. You know, oh, I'm just gonna plug it in to format it. Well, you just plug it in, and as soon as you plug it in, it's doing damage. Impersonation. So an attacker could pretend to be someone that they're not. You know, maybe they're sending you an email and they're pretending to be the CEO of the company, and they're not. And then there's other things like tailgating, as I said. An attacker is following an authorized person into a secure area. So, you know, you've got your arms full of groceries and you're struggling, and somebody's walking through the door, and you ask them to hold the door for you, and they're trying to be helpful. Or what about if somebody's in a wheelchair? Sure, wouldn't most of us hold the door for somebody who's in a wheelchair? Right, absolutely. Shoulder surfing, so looking over your shoulder to steal information, to steal your password. Or even dumpster diving. The amount of information that goes in the trash is just incredible. You can find out so much information about a company by what they put in the trash. So you should always make sure that you shred. So some of the protection against social engineering: train your users and use best practices. Train your users. Don't scare your users. If your user is afraid to come and tell you that there's a problem, they won't. And then that one problem that you could have managed with that one user all of a sudden turns into your whole network is screwed. So don't have your users be afraid of you. I don't know, we can't say stupid users because we're the ones that are supposed to train them. So educate them and make sure that they know that it's okay to come and tell you if there's something wrong with their system, or if they accidentally clicked on a link. Don't say, oh, that was stupid. Just say, oh my gosh, okay, don't worry, let's take care of that. Make sure that they can come and tell you that they goofed, because we're human and they're going to be afraid. They don't want to get, you know, reprimanded. They don't want to get teased. They don't want to get called a stupid user. So train your users, be friends with them, protect passwords, have a strong password policy, destroy your data properly. Have your users, if they see something, have them say something. If you see somebody walking around your building with a clipboard in their hand, find out who they are if they're not being escorted. What are they doing there? Who are they? And make sure that they're being escorted and that somebody that they're supposed to be there. Because a clipboard can get you anywhere, along with a little name tag that you can print up on anything. Make sure that you lock your PCs. So when a PC is not in use for a few minutes, have it go back to the login screen again. Consider the source always, whether it's email or software. If there's a link, I want you to check that link before you click on it. And keep your mouth shut. Don't divulge network information. Don't brag about your job. and how you did this and that at this company, or what new hardware we got at this company. So it's, you are also someone who can give a bad guy some vulnerable information. So I know it sounds like I'm really lecturing at you, but it's so important, because we can patch systems all day long, but if somebody just opens the door, it doesn't do us any good. And the smaller the problem is, the easier it is for you to manage. So a security policy is a set of security objectives that ensure the security of a network. It's going to talk about the data, the computers in the organization. It's going to be constantly evolving based on changes in the technology. So it's a document that is going to constantly evolve. It's going to have changes on the technology, on business, on employee requirements. It's usually created by a committee with members consisting of the management and the IT staff. And it's usually up to the IT staff to implement the security policy specifications in the network. If there isn't a security policy where you end up working, make sure that you create one, because it's important. It is best practices. It's part of your job. So different security policy categories. So we've got identification and authentication policies. That's going to outline our verification procedures and specify authorized persons that can have access to your network resources. We're going to have password policies, ensuring that passwords meet minimum requirements and that they're changed regularly. We're going to have acceptable use policies, identifying the network resources and usages that are acceptable to the organization. And that may include ramifications for policy violation. For example, you don't want your users uploading videos from their Hawaii vacation onto their business computer, because when you're doing backups, you shouldn't have to back up their stuff. Another thing to think about is them, using your system as a seed for or installing applications. Acceptable use policies, really important. Remote access policies, identify how remote users access the network and what is accessible. Also make sure that you're using secure AAA protocols for that to manage it. Our network maintenance policies, so specifying our network device operating systems and our end user application update procedures. We need to make sure that we're updating all of our things, including the firmware on our switches and our routers. Any incident handling policies, so when there is a security incident, how are they going to be handled? A perfect example of how important it is to have incident handling policies is, a good example would be this coronavirus mess. There is a stack of books about this high of procedures for handling a pandemic and who is supposed to do what and what organization is supposed to handle what. And those procedures should have been implemented the moment the WHO said that there was a pandemic. And all throughout this entire thing, we shouldn't have had states trying to buy masks individually when that's the job of the federal government. So I'm not going to try and get political here. I'm just simply saying that if there are proper procedures in place, everybody knows what job they're supposed to do, and everything gets done efficiently, effectively, and it minimizes the network downtime, the business downtime, and it keeps your job. The bottom line is really the goal of security policy is to ensure a safe network environment and to protect assets, and those assets are data. An organization's assets could include the data, employees, physical devices like computers and network equipment. The security policy should identify hardware and equipment that can be used to prevent theft, vandalism, and data loss. So there's lots of things that we need to think about. Physical security. So here we've got an authentication practice, and we've got, it looks like we have two-factor authentication. So we have a key, we have a card, and we also have a keypad. So one question is, should there be a CC camera over the keypad to the entrance? Probably not. There should be a CC camera over the entrance of the building, but not on the keypad, because if this was only one-factor authentication and you just had to push in the pin, that camera could catch, could show the pin to open the door, which in turn, the camera could be exploited. And if somebody could see that camera, could see the keypad and the pin. So physical security is just as important as data security. So if a computer is taken from an organization, the data could also be stolen, or worse, it could be lost. Physical security involves securing access to the organization's premise, access to restricted areas, and the computing and network infrastructure. So for our policy categories, so we've got a conventional lock, unlocked by entering, conventional lock is unlocked by entering the required key into the door handle mechanism. Well, anyone who has played with any lock picking tools know that conventional locks are not very secure. A deadbolt lock, unlocked by entering the required key into a lock separate from the door handle. Well, that also can be picked and is not so secure. We've got electronic locks, so unlocked by entering the secret combination code or the PIN into the keypad. The PIN should be changed occasionally to prevent worn keys. Have any of you guys ever seen an electronic lock and the numbers for the lock have always been the same, and those numbers are worn off, which makes it real easy to figure out, oh, well, okay, it's got to either be this or that or this or that. So there's also token-based locks. So unlock by swiping a secure card or by using a near proximity reader to detect a smart card or a wireless key fob. We've got biometric locks, which is a good two-factor authentication. If you're using that along with a keypad, it's going to be unlocked using biometric scanner like a thumbprint reader. And biometric means something that you have. So a lot of things we're thinking about here is something that you have, something that you are, something that you know, so a PIN, and of course a multi-factor lock, which uses a combination of those mechanisms and makes it more secure. Because even if the keypad gets worn from the PIN, you still have to have the card, or you still have to have a thumbprint. So here's a man trap, and a man trap is not something the girls do. A man trap is simply a way of securing your environment, and there isn't a data center out there that doesn't have multiple man traps. In high security environments, man traps are often used to limit access to restricted areas and also to prevent tailgating. So a man trap is a small room with two doors, one of which has to be closed before the other one can be opened. So typically a person is going to enter the man trap by unlocking one door, and then once inside the man trap, the first door closes, and then the user has to unlock the second door to enter the restricted area. It's best to have a guard viewing the area to ensure that there's no tailgating. Or there should at least be a camera there with a guard watching the camera to ensure that there's no tailgating. Network equipment should only be installed in secured areas. So that's why we have locks on our server rooms, on our MDFs or IDFs. So MDF is main distribution frame, and IDF is intermediary distribution frame. And basically those are the rooms that house our servers and our switches and our routers and all that crucial equipment. The networking equipment should only be installed in those secure areas. As well, all cabling should be enclosed within conduits or routed inside of the walls to prevent unauthorized access or tampering, because we don't want that happening either. Securing our computers and network hardware. So some of the ways, the most effective equipment to use to secure equipment and data. So for example, a computer in a busy public place requires additional protection from theft and vandalism. If you're in a busy call center, a server may be needed to secure the locked equipment room. While using a laptop in a public place, a security dongle and a key fob ensure that the computer locks if the user and the laptop are separated. Data is crucial and really important, and it is your greatest asset. Data is likely to be the organization's most valuable asset. So organizational data could include research and development. So there's lots of cyber espionage from companies. In particular, there are some countries that are well known for stealing research and development and then either counterfeiting it or calling it their own. So it could be sales information like contact lists. It could be financial information, a human resources list that have users' names and birth dates and social security numbers, employee and customer data. Data can be lost or damaged in circumstances like theft, equipment failure, or a disaster. Data loss or exfiltration are terms used to describe when data has been lost, stolen, or leaked to the public. And it can be data can be protected from loss using backups, file and folder encryption, and permissions. Want to make sure that you secure your data. Backups, backups, backups. You're going to hear me say backups in every single course that you have with me because they are so important, and they prevent resume generating events. So if everything hits the fan and your system, your system goes down, a server breaks, or something happens, a file server breaks, or a router or a switch, if you've got backups of things, that's going to make you minimize the amount of time that your network is going to be down. That is part of your job, absolutely positively, is to protect the data. A data backup stores a copy of the information on a computer to a removable backup media. Data backups should be performed on a regular basis as identified in the security policy. So that your security policy is going to include when you back up, how frequently, what kinds of backups you're going to be doing, when do you do full backups, and when do you do incremental backups. And a lot of that is going to depend upon your business model and how frequently your data changes and the value of the data. So data backups are usually stored off-site to prevent the backup media if anything happens to the main facility, right? So if you had a business in Paradise and your backups were stored right next to your servers, or and everything burned, you've got some serious problems. So it's one of the main reasons why having a backup to the cloud is a really good idea. It doesn't cost much to put the backup there, but it does cost some money to get it back down. File and folder permissions. So permissions are rules that you configure to limit file or folder access to an individual or for a group of users. And users should be limited only to the resources that they need on the computer or the network. And that would be your least privilege. They should only have access to what they need to do their job and no more than that. That's the principle of least privilege. With file and folder encryption, so it's often used to protect data. Encryption is where the data is transformed using a complicated algorithm to make it unreadable. The NTFS file system allows for file and folder encryption, and FAT file system does not. The encrypted file system is directly linked to a specific user account, and only the user that encrypted the data will be able to access the data once it's been encrypted. Special keys have to be used to return the unreadable information back into readable form. So one of the things that you want to think about when you have encrypted files and folders and you have users that change their passwords. If you have a user that changes that, so you've told the users to change their passwords and they changed their passwords, and one of the users forgot their password and needs you to reset it. In order for you to reset that password, you are going to lose the certificate link to that encryption, which means that they will not be able to access that data. So your file and folder encryption is linked to your digital certificate on that system. And so you need to make sure that you secure that. As an administrator, there are, of course, ways that you can recover that encrypted data, which is above and beyond what the users should be able to do. BitLocker and BitLocker to go. So I'm using BitLocker. So basically you're encrypting the entire hard drive using BitLocker. With BitLocker, you need to make sure that you have a TPM chip on your, a TPM, a trusted platform module or a TPM chip. And that is going to be on your motherboard. The TPM module also has to be enabled in the BIOS. And TPM is a specialized chip installed on the motherboard, and it stores your encryption keys, your digital certificates, and your passwords. And BitLocker encryption can also be used with removable drives using BitLocker to go. BitLocker to go does not use the TPM chip, but it still provides encryption that requires a password. So encryption is a really good thing. There is a demonstration on BitLocker and BitLocker to go. And there's a lab on that, which we are not going to be doing. Sorry, I should have gotten rid of that. So how do we get rid of data? So protecting the data also includes removing files from storage devices when they're no longer needed. Simply deleting files or reformatting the drive is not enough to ensure your privacy. Software tools can be used to recover the folders, the files, or even entire partitions. And for that reason, strong media, storage media should be fully erased using one or more methods here. We've got disk wiping software, we've got a degaussing wand, and we've got an electromagnetic degaussing device. So your degaussing wand is not going to be usable on your SSDs, right? Data wiping software, there are specific NSA or Department of Defense tools that that provide a thorough wipe. So just formatting a drive gets rid of the pointers to the data. It doesn't get rid of the data. Just using a disk wipe tool on one pass isn't going to be enough to not recover that data. You can still recover that data. So, and then there's other media. Actually, I've got the Department of Defense information on a future slide, so we'll get to that. So anyway, degaussing isn't effective for erasing data from flash memory. So to perform a secure erase, to fully ensure that the data cannot be recovered from an SSD or a hybrid SSD, you could also use a shredding machine or an incinerator designed to destroy documents and each type of media. The best way to destroy a hard drive is with a Mossberg, I found. Don't forget that printers and multifunction devices also have a hard drive that has a copy, a cache, a copy of everything that was printed or scanned. And that can be turned off in some instances, or the device may need to be wiped on a regular basis to make sure that that data isn't available. Hard drive recycling and destruction. So as I said, best way to destroy it is with a Mossberg. You can, if you destroy the hard drive, you're destroying the hard drive. That makes sure that the data can't be recovered. Recycling, so basically hard drives that have been wiped can be reused in other computers. The drive can be reformatted and a new operating system installed. So, and here we're talking about the low-level format that is done at the factory and the standard format. So the federal standard for securely wiping data from hard drives is Department of Defense 522.0.22 M, and that's a software-based data sanitization. Wow, that's an awful word. Software-based data wiping method used in various file shredder and data destruction programs. And that basically overwrites the existing information on the hard drive or other storage device. The minimum Department of Defense level requirement is a 3-pass overwrite, but there's also a 7-pass overwrite, which is DOD 5220.22 MECE. So some of the tools that you can use is DBAN, Derek's Boot and Nuke. You can use Disk Wipe. Disk Wipe is a Windows application. So it works as a Windows application. It's not standalone. So you would be using Disk Wipe for your USBs and your secondary disks. You could also use Kill Disk or Blanco. And those are all have Department of Defense clearing for. And here is a chart of the different types of media and how to clear the data or how to sanitize the data. And if you'll notice over here where it has clear and sanitize, we've got different letters. And on this next page, it talks about the different things that you can do. DGOS with a type 1 degosser, DGOS with a type 2 degosser, overwrite all addressable locations with a character, its complement, and then a random character. Each overwrite has to reside in memory for a period longer than a classified data resides. I mean, there are seriously strict rules regarding the clearing and sanitization matrix. So these are the Department of Defense rules for clearing data. So let's talk about security in general. One acronym to remember is AAA, AAA, and that is authentication, authorization, and accounting. Authentication is you logging in with the username and password or with a key fob or with a thumbprint. Authorization is what are you allowed to do once you've been authenticated. And accounting is that log file that's going to keep on track of everybody who accessed this system, this file, whatever, and when they did and what they did. Another acronym to remember is the CIA triad, and the CIA triad consists of confidentiality, so only getting data to who it's supposed to get to, and not allowing other people to have access to it, which would include our encryption. Integrity, so making sure that data hasn't been modified from point A to point B. And availability, making sure that your system doesn't get hit with a DDoS attack and it's always available. So when you're securing a computer, basically you want to make sure that you lock down your workstation when you're not present to prevent unauthorized users from stealing or accessing local computer or network resources. If you have to leave a computer in an open area, cable locks should be used to deter theft, and use a privacy screen to protect the data, the information that's being displayed from people who are standing on the sides of you. Access to your computer also has to be protected. There should be 3 levels of password protection. There are 3 levels of password protection that can be used on a computer. So there's lots of things that we need to make sure that we're considering. So we've got our BIOS password, right? All users, regardless of the user account, share BIOS passwords. So anybody who's logging into that system itself will be using the same BIOS password because that password is for that computer, not for that user. So UFI passwords can be set on a per user basis, however, and an authentication server would be required for that. Just remember that the BIOS password can be reset by changing a jumper on the motherboard or by removing the CMOS battery. So securing the BIOS isn't that secure if you can just open it up and change that jumper or remove the battery. We've got the Windows login. So most common is Windows Hello. So that enables Windows to use facial recognition or to use your fingerprint to access Windows. We've got PIN, which is a pre-configured PIN number to access Windows. We've got a picture password. So you could use a picture and gestures to use with the picture to create a unique password. You've got a dynamic lock feature, which could make Windows lock when a prepared device like a cell phone goes out of range of the PC. Passwords and logins are just a pain and everybody hates them, and we all have hundreds of them, and they are a problem. So so it's really important to make sure that computers are secure when the users are away. So password policy should contain a rule requiring a computer to lock when the screensaver starts. In all versions of Windows, you can use control panel personalization, and then screensaver. And then on the screensaver and wait time, there's a select on resume display login screen option. And so that's what you want to do. And as an administrator, you may need to reset a user's password. In doing so, you're going to remove access to any encrypted files or folders. So if you have to reset the password, that can be a problem. So username and passwords. So usernames, like passwords, are an important piece of information and shouldn't be revealed. Password guidelines are an important component of a security policy. Any user that logs onto a computer or connects to a network resource should be required to have a password. Passwords help prevent theft of data and malicious acts. They help confirm that the logging of events is valid by ensuring that the user is the correct person. If Windows computers are members of a domain, then the administrator is going to configure a domain security policy, and that's going to apply to all the computers that join. Then there's account policies that are automatically set when a user logs into Windows. So if it's not domain joined, then you're going to be relying on your Windows local security policy. And one of your labs is going to be playing with your local security policy. And you can do that by using run secpol MSC. And your secpol is going to give you a lot of granular security features. Your account, so your security policy is going to identify the password policies required. So it's going to, so how is it going to be, how many characters? A minimum 8 characters, I say at least 10. The account lockouts prevent brute force access. So I like 3, so it's going to lock after 3 failed tries, and it'll lock for 10 minutes. And of course, this can be a problem when you make your users change their passwords frequently and they forget their passwords, right? And there's also, thank goodness, as far as security goes, there's lots of standardized organizations that have set best policy practices, and NIST is one of those organizations. And the NIST password standards 863.3. That's a recent update to the previous password standards, and it kind of flips the script on widely accepted password policies. So the new policies, according to NIST, which are not necessarily the new policies that apply to this chapter as far as the Cisco networking assignments go. The framework is all about simplifying the password management for users and leaving out overly complex security requirements. So the NIST password requirements are setting an 8-character minimum length, changing passwords only if there's evidence of compromise, and screen new passwords against a list of known compromised passwords. Make sure that your users are not using the same password on multiple things. Skip password hints and knowledge-based security questions, because knowledge-based security questions can be information that you can find from Facebook or from any of those stupid Facebook quizzes, like what Lord of the Rings character are you like, those ask questions that could be your security questions. Make sure that you limit the number of failed authentication attempts. So the NIST framework recommendations are set the maximum password length to at least 64 characters. Skip character composition rules, so because they're an unnecessary burden for end users. So you don't have to put uppercase, lowercase, all that other stuff. I disagree. Allow copy and paste functionality in password fields to facilitate the use of password managers, because password managers are your friends. And allow the use of all printable ASCII characters as well as all Unicode characters, which includes emojis. So by following some of those NIST recommendations, you can employ best practices for your environment. Those are not going to be the answers that are on any of the chapter exams for this chapter, though, because those are the latest, newest NIST password standards. So Getting back to our local security policy, as you can see here, we've got security settings and local policies. We've got audit policy, user rights assignment, security options, lots of things that we can play with, and we can really get granular in here. So here we've got accounting. So our password policy was authentication, right? Because we're authenticating. For our security policy settings, we're talking about accounting. So when you look in Event Viewer at security, there's usually no entries because you aren't auditing. As soon as you create a security audit policy, then the results will be logged in Event Viewer. That should always have a security, you should always have a audit policy for failed login attempts. That way you can see if someone has tried to log into has tried to guess your password or brute force your account. You may also want to audit successful login attempts. So it's easy to get crazy and audit everything, but then you're using up resources for monitoring instead of for computing. And you also end up with an overabundance of log files, and you'll be trying to find a needle in a haystack when you're filtering through it, all those log files for relevant data. So you really don't want to filter, we really don't want to audit everything, just some of the main things like account login and account failed login attempts and successful login attempts. In our security policy, we can also set how many characters we're requiring for our password, how frequently that password needs to be changed. Also, your password history. So you can't recycle the same password again and again and again each time you change your password. One of the nice things here is you can export and import your local security policy, and to keep a standardized policy, you can import and export the policy and then apply it to all of your workstations. And it's much easier to manage your security through an Active Directory domain. But if you're not members of a domain and you're using local security policy, at least you can make sure that all of the computers in your workstation on your LAN have uniform security policy enabled. And there is going to be a net lab for configuring your Windows local security policy. Maintaining accounts. So some of the things we can talk about here is terminating employee access. Well, as a network administrator, not necessarily as a tier 1 tech, but as a network administrator, you should know if HR is planning on firing someone, because you want to make sure that you are terminating their access and that they can't take data with them or destroy your system or anything like that. So when an employee leaves an organization, you immediately want to disable their account or change their login credentials. If you know in advance that they're going to get fired, then you can start limiting what they have access to, and then just complain that there's a glitch in the system that you're working on. You should have a special guest account for temps and or for temporary users and guests with additional privileges that can be created and disabled as required. You can track your login time, so allow employee logins only during specific hours of the day and block logins during the rest of the day. We want to make sure that we're auditing our failed login attempts, so log our failed login attempts and configure a specific number of times that a user can attempt to log in. Idle timeout and screen lock. Make sure that when the computer isn't being used, that there is an idle timer to automatically log the user out, and then the user has to be logged back in to unlock the screen. So we've got our user account control, which I know any of you who had Vista had a problem with that because it was either on or off, and it always asked you the same thing, and it never asked you for a password. It just wanted to make sure that you're sure you want to do this. So our user account control has gotten way better now. It's a toggle, and it's a good idea to take advantage of the user account control tool. Through local group policy, you can effectively manage your users and groups, and really you want to make sure that you're managing all that stuff with our local users and groups. That if you right click right-click My PC, and then go to Manage. You'll find your local users and groups manager. This is where you really want to create user accounts. And because you can lock an account, you can assign a user to a group, you can control which folder the user has access to. You can set up whether or not they have remote access capabilities. So here we're basically setting our authorization policy. With passwords, where we're dealing with authentication, here we're setting authorization policy, so what they can access. And managing groups, it's much easier to manage groups of people according to their job role or their department than it is to manage their access to resources and permissions on an individual basis. You run the risk of user error when you're creating individual user accounts and privileges. So if you do it in a group according to their job role or their department, it makes it much easier, because of course all of the accountants are going to need access to the account file server and the account software. The salespeople don't need access to that, right? The HR people don't need access to the accounting information or to the sales data. They just need access to the employee information. So by creating groups, you are making it much easier for you to manage all of the people that and all of the resources and permissions in that. With Active Directory users and computers, if you're in an enterprise environment or even a small to mid-sized company, Active Directory or ADDS is the best way to manage everyone and everything. You're managing your users, your groups, your computers, your file servers, your servers, everything, and your remote access, all of those things can be done through group policy. And in the server class, CSCI 75 to be specific, we'll be doing a deep dive into Active Directory users and groups and managing our federated services and managing single sign-on federated services and all of that. But it's creating organizational units and group policy is really the best way of doing it through Active Directory. And so configuring users and groups in Windows, I believe there is a NetLab for that as well. And now we can talk about firewalls. So I know in Chapter 9, I gave you a firewall lab that has been repeated in Chapter 13, because so those of you who already did it in Chapter 9, excellent. You don't need to do it again. For those of you who didn't get to it in Chapter 9, that has been moved to Chapter 13. Because I really want you to practice playing with the advanced firewall features in Windows. So with firewalls, so you should have a hardware firewall at the edge of your network to filter traffic. And depending upon the size of your network, there's many network security appliances. Common appliances include IDS and IPS. So that would be an intrusion detection system or an intrusion prevention system. Of course, a prevention system is going to be better than a detection system, because unless you're watching the detection system, it's not going to do you much good. So, so your network should have a firewall, IDS or IPS. It may have a unified threat management appliance or a UTM, and that's going to cover multiple threat vectors. In your home environment, often though, you can configure your wireless access point as a firewall, right? And if that isn't an option, at least use your Windows firewall. So firewalls are really important, and they deny or allow traffic, network traffic, based on either the application or based on the protocol or the port number. So Windows Firewall has an advanced feature console that gives you more granular control. So there are some basic settings in Windows Firewall, and that's either home or public or work or whichever. And here, when we get into the advanced features console, that gives you a lot more granular control. It allows you to modify your traffic access through ports, protocols, and application. So Windows Firewall is also a good example of a software firewall. And if you go to Windows Firewall and you go to Advanced, then that that allows you to make firewall rules regarding inbound and outbound traffic. So don't forget, we have bi-directional traffic in our networks, into and out of our computers. When we request a website, information from a website, we're sending a request out of our network, and then it's sending a reply back to our network. So we don't want unsolicited network traffic coming into our network. We want to make sure that if something's coming from the internet, we've requested that information first. The standard window firewall is location-based. It's easy to configure for the standard user. And there's, of course, also third-party software firewalls. You can explicitly allow or deny applications through the firewall. Most applications that are created have a specific port number assigned to them that you may have to unblock. And we can allow a specific program through a specific program or port through our firewall. And the advanced security is where you can really have the most control over your traffic, both inbound and outbound, protocol, application, port numbers, and all of that. So there's a lot of details. You can get to it through wf.msc. So MSC is Microsoft Management Console. So you can get to it through there. And configuring our Windows firewall, which was the lab that the NetLab Plus that I put in chapter 9. Web security. So web security. So how much fun and how effective is your computer use without internet access, right? It's not much fun at all. Everything we do now is online, and we use browsers to access everything. The browser you use, the plugins you add can either increase or decrease your security. This certification is most interested in Internet Explorer and maybe Edge, and doesn't care about Chrome or Firefox or Safari or any of the other browsers out there. And there are a lot of browsers out there. So you may use specific browsers for specific reasons. For example, I like Firefox because I can install NoScript and I can use NoScript. And for those of you who have ever used NoScript, basically every web page that you go to, it's going to show you all of the scripts that are being run on that page that you're not aware of. And you can pick and choose which you want to run. The problem with that is, excuse me, when you get to a website, the video isn't going to run until you enable and allow it to run. So on public computers, my gosh, always clear your history, use in private mode like incognito or private window. Often if you're using a public computer, if you restart the computer, it will clear the history cache because you don't want to leave all that information still there, right? Pop-up blockers. So they're pretty standard these days, and many websites or web apps don't work unless you allow them through the pop-up blocker. So you have to enable that. Our smart screen filter. It's a security feature that was introduced in IE 8 to help protect against malicious websites. In 8.1, it was introduced to the desktop level, and it could warn you before running unrecognized apps from the internet that could potentially be unsafe. This security layer is built into Windows 10 too, so if you're an experienced power user, you should already know what's safe and what isn't when it comes to downloading and installing apps. So you don't need the annoyance of the smart screen filter always popping up at you when you're about to install things. That being said, your users should have this enabled because it's important for them. ActiveX filtering. So ActiveX controls are small apps that allow websites to provide content like videos and games. They let you interact with content like toolbars and stock tickers when you browse the web, but these apps can sometimes malfunction or give you content that you don't want. In some cases, they might be used to collect information from your PC damage info on your PC, install software on your PC without your agreement, or let someone else control your PC remotely. So ActiveX filtering in Internet Explorer prevents sites from installing and using apps. Using these apps. It helps keep you safer as you browse, but it can also affect the performance of certain sites. For example, when you have ActiveX filtering on, videos, games, and some other interactive content may not work. So restrictive settings. So devices often come with security features that aren't enabled. Always, always, always look at the defaults and see what the defaults are, because chances are that's not what you're going to want. It's going to be the least secure. So it's your responsibility to secure devices and configure restrictive settings. Disabling autoplay. So remember that 128 gig USB drive that we found in the parking lot? Well, if we have autoplay enabled on our computer, as soon as we plug that USB drive in, it can cause problems. So malware could easily be installed by a user just inserting the USB drive if autoplay is enabled. It's best to disable autoplay, absolutely, positively. Operating system service packs and security patches. So updates, whether they are service packs or security patches, are crucial to the health and well-being of your computer. Service packs are cumulative updates that include code fixes and sometimes new features. Security patches are code fixes to known security vulnerabilities. So those security patches, since they're known security vulnerabilities, it's already been posted on US CERT. And so there's already a CVE file out there for it. So if you don't patch your system, we've already told the bad guys how to access your system and exploit it the easy way. So please make sure that you you update and update your system and your applications. So wireless security. I'm going to start this one by saying there's no such thing as wireless security. There are, however, lots of specific things that you can do to be as secure as possible. So, of course, using VPNs and strong encryption protocols can help you secure your network transmissions. So here we have confidentiality and integrity. Remember the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So here we have confidentiality and integrity. You can use hash encoding. So hash encoding would be integrity. We've got hash encoding, symmetric encryption, and asymmetric encryption. And we can use those to accomplish some of these tasks. Let's start with integrity and the hash algorithms. This means that the message is not corrupt, nor has it been tampered with during the transmissions. Hashing uses a mathematical function, and it creates a numeric value called a message digest that's unique to the data. And it's always going to be the same length. And so whether you are running a hash algorithm on an entire book, an entire application, or just a document, it's still going to be, your key is still going to be the same length. It's not going to be longer or smaller. You can't reverse that hash algorithm and recreate the document or recreate the book. It's just going to verify that the data has not been changed. It's using a mathematical function to create a numeric value called a message digest that's unique to the data. The most popular hashing algorithm is SHA, secure hash algorithm, which is replacing the MD5 algorithm. There's different versions of SHA. SHA-1 is broken. Don't rely on it. Please, if you're going to use SHA-356. Symmetric encryption. So that involves a shared secret password that both the sender and the recipient both know. So basically, we both know the password, so we can access it. Asymmetric encryption, on the other hand, involves the PKI, or the public key infrastructure, and it's a set of roles and policies and hardware and software and procedures that are needed to create, manage, and distribute and use and store and revoke digital certificates and manage public key encryption. We use certificate authorities as the trusted third parties to validate our identity. Service identifiers. So our SSID is broadcast usually. Disabling it doesn't make it invisible. You can use AirCrack or the latest version of Wireshark to see the SSID of a wireless network, even though it isn't being broadcast. So your SSID really isn't, not broadcasting your SSID really isn't going to do a lot of good. Your authentication, on the other hand, is going to be what secures your system. So with a shared key, it's going to provide mechanisms to authenticate and decrypt data between a wireless client and the access point of a wireless router. WEP stands for Wired Equivalent Privacy. It was the first wireless security standard, which was better than nothing back in 1997, but it is totally worthless. So don't ever use WEP. WPA stands for Wired Wi-Fi Protected Access. We've got IEEE 802.11i and WPA2. That's the current industry standard for securing WLANs, so wireless LANs. Both use AES, and we've got WPA3. So with WPA3, rather than relying on, so actually WPA3 isn't actually discussed in this chapter, but that is one of the latest things. And rather than relying on shared passwords, WPA3 signs up a new devices through processes that don't require the use of a shared password. So this new system is called Wi-Fi Device Provisioning Protocol, or DPP. And it works by transmitting how to gain access to the system without transmitting a password into the air. So with DPP, your users use a QR code or NFC tags and let their devices onto the network. By snapping a picture or receiving a radio signal from the router, a device can be authenticated to the network without sacrificing security. WPA3 encryption is geared to be better than the previous iterations of Wi-Fi technology. Granted, nothing lasts forever in the world of security, but WPA3 encryption is covered by a 256-bit Gallios counter mode protocol. So that makes breaking it through encryption way harder. As with any encryption, the bigger the key, the harder it's going to be to break. WPA2. So let's jump back to WPA2, which is what most of us are still using. There was a vulnerability with Broadcom and Cypress Wi-Fi chips known as Crook, and basically it was tracked as CVE 2019-15126, and basically it could let nearby remote attackers intercept and decrypt some wireless network packets transmitted over the air by a vulnerable device by basically active eavesdropping. There has been a firmware update to prevent this vulnerability, but that firmware update only works if it's been applied to your wireless access points. So if you haven't updated the firmware on your wireless access point at home, please make sure that you do so, because otherwise you are vulnerable. So here on our wireless security modes, we can see all of the different types of security that we can implement. And here we've got the Wi-Fi protected setup button, WPS. So it's automatically going to configure the security between the devices. It's vulnerable to brute force attacks, so it should be turned off. Please don't use it. Firmware updates. Once again, please, most wireless routers offer upgradable firmware. Check your manufacturer for firmware updates on your wireless access points. So your wireless router at home, make sure that it's updated. So your wireless access point can also be configured as a hardware firewall. It can be configured to allow two different types of traffic onto your network. Responses to traffic that originates from inside of your network. So for example, a GET reply for a website, or traffic destined to a port that you have intentionally left open. So hardware firewalls can be used to block ports, prevent unauthorized access into and out of the LAN. And there are situations, though, when specific ports have to be open so that certain programs and applications can communicate with the devices on different networks. So you need to find out what port it is that needs to be open. Universal plug and play is an absolutely horrific protocol. Make sure that you always disable universal plug and play. It basically enables devices to dynamically forward traffic through network ports without any user intervention or configuration. It's used for streaming media, for hosting games, and providing services. There is a packet tracer activity where you're configuring wireless security on a wireless access point in packet tracer. So please do that. And let's get into our basic troubleshooting process. Hey, this is going to look really familiar. Identify the problem, establish a theory of probable cause, test the theory to determine the cause. Perhaps at step 3, we fixed it. If we haven't fixed it, then we're going to have to do more research and go to step 4 and do more research and implement a plan of action to resolve the problem. Once we've done that and we figured it out, we can verify system functionality and implement preventative measures. And then we're going to document all of our actions and outcomes. So here we have examples of some of the questions that we're going to be asking our users when we're trying to identify the problem. Is your security software up to date? Have you scanned your computer recently for viruses? What websites have you visited recently? What security software is installed? Who else has used your computer recently? When did the problem start? Have you shared your password? So establishing the theory. So some of our common problems could be a virus, a Trojan horse, a worm, spyware, adware. So any of your antivirus software solutions are going to have an area where you can see what has been done. Has a password been compromised? They're unprotected equipment rooms. So let's get into that physical security, right? An unsecured work environment. Once again, physical security. And then test the theory. So my gosh, if you think something has been compromised, disconnect it from the network immediately. Update your antivirus and spyware. Check your computer and protection. Check your computer with protection software. Check to make sure that you've had updated patches and updates. Reboot the computer. So each time that you try and fix it, reboot the computer, because rebooting the computer is going to put things in their proper place. You may have already fixed the problem, but if you don't reboot the computer, it's not going to implement the solution. And so it's going to still show the same problem. So make sure that you reboot the computer after each solution that you attempt. Log in as an administrator to change a user's password. Secure your rooms, my gosh. Enforce a network security policy. And then you're going to, so you still haven't figured out what the problem is, so then you're going to want to look at help desk repair logs, other technicians, web manufacturers, FAQs. Was there a recent Windows update that broke something? You should subscribe to US CERT, which is the Carnegie Mellon database of security activity. Check some security sites like FireEye and Talos and all those places that's their job, is to keep on track of things. They're going to be the ones that know what the problem is before it's published and widely available. So you may need to, and then once you've done that, make sure that it's working. Reboot it, rescan it with multiple different types of antivirus software. Make sure that there's no spyware, there's no viruses. Use CCleaner, use Spybot, search and destroy. check your computer for updates and patches. Check your network connectivity. Make sure that you're set to the correct DNS server. Perhaps clear your DNS cache, and then do all of your documentation. So here's a pile of common problems and solutions. And sometimes it's really nice if there's already a security alert displayed. Sometimes, and please make sure that your users know that when they're surfing the web and a security alert has been displayed, a lot of times that security alert is a ransomware. And they should hit Alt F5 to immediately get out of that window. Don't click the X button, because the X button can be coded to install the software. So when you have, and a lot of times, you know, your parents and your aunts and your uncles and your grandparents may not be aware of these things. They just see that they're surfing and there's a security alert displayed. Well, and then they click on the, oh my gosh, I've got a problem, you know, and then all of a sudden, before you know it, they're calling the phone number, and they've been shown how to get to Event Viewer, and Event Viewer is showing them all those warnings. And before you know it, they have connected to, you know, they've installed remote software, and they've been basically completely pwned by the organization, that the criminals. Anyway, sorry, I kind of went off in left field again. So are there any security alerts? Authorized wireless access points. Make sure that all of your access points are authorized and that you know who they are. A user who has a wireless access point in their office that you don't know about is probably set for the defaults, and it's probably wide open, and through that, bad people can gain access to your network. So there's a good reason why there's lots of security classes, and I can't go over every little thing here, but these are some of the basic things that you need to know to keep on track of things. And we're not doing that lab. Yeah, lots of things, right? We talked about some common security threats, how to prevent and recover from threats, the purpose and use of security procedures in protecting your physical equipment and data, securing your Windows workstations and your BIOS, your operating systems, and firewalls, configuring wireless security settings in a small office or on a home office router, and troubleshooting are common problems. Security is whack-a-mole. There will always be a new exploit. There will always be a new vulnerability out there. So you need to, that's one of those things that you have got to stay on top of and make sure that, that you're managing things properly.